Hello, I'm Rosa Norberg. I am the co-president of RIRID. And you are?
And I'm Maureen McEntee, the co-president of RIRID. And that's the Registry of Interpreters for the Deaf right here in Rhode Island.
Rhode Island Registry of Interpreters for the Deaf, RIRID, is an affiliate chapter of the National Registry of Interpreters for the Deaf, which is a certifying body for interpreters. And what we do is provide sign language interpreting services for individuals across the state. And we are a volunteer member-driven organization, and we provide networking and opportunities to keep our profession among the standards of the nation. We have several categories of membership. Did you want to explain that, Maureen?
And basically, the certified members are those people who have certification from the National Registry of Interpreters for the Deaf, and that is a national certifying body across the United States. Associate people are those who are pre-certified, maybe an associate member of RID. And then we have members who are also supporting the interpreter and translation services, the community, students who may be enrolled in ASL classes or interpreter training classes or interpreter training programs. And again, organizations that also work with us for joint projects and in support of the interpreter community.
The mission of the Rhode Island Registry of Interpreters for the Deaf is to increase access and awareness between the deaf community and the community at large. And we work collaboratively with other agencies. We work with the Rhode Island Association for the Deaf, with the Commission on the Deaf and Hard of Hearing, and other agencies that want to provide access and remove barriers for the deaf community.
So an interpreter is someone who has some specialized training and has to be competent in both ASL, American Sign Language, and English. And if they're using any other spoken language, competencies in those languages as well. American Sign Language, which most people don't realize, is the third most commonly used language in the United States. So it is much more prevalent, and the community that uses ASL is much larger than most hearing people would expect to see. They are trained, interpreters are trained in facilitating communication, both the language and the culture, because deaf culture and hearing culture does vary. They have to be able to listen to the person's, if the hearing person is speaking, listen to their words, their intent, their meaning, and then render that in a visual form through ASL that's understood by the deaf person, and then rendering the deaf person's sign, their ASL, back into spoken English, which again maintains the intent, the purpose of the communication, and so that communication easily flows between both parties. Interpreters can also be hearing or deaf, and often it's very helpful to have a deaf interpreter.
So what is a deaf interpreter? A deaf interpreter, sometimes in our field, we call them DI or CDI. What a deaf interpreter is a person who is deaf, who has specialized training in communication with others, and they have a special training so that they can communicate with persons, whether it's a complicated topic, complex, could it be legal, maybe it's whatever the content area is, they have specialized training to be the most effective in interpreting with another deaf person. And typically that deaf interpreter will work alongside a hearing interpreter, and it makes the communication most effective and most successful, and it saves an awful lot of time and lessens confusion between the parties trying to communicate.
I'm going to add into that, and also oftentimes in healthcare situations, whether that be mental health, behavioral health, etc., it helps to have a deaf interpreter there because you're assuring that the communication is clear, is culturally on target, and that there is no communication issues that or breakdowns that happen, so that which would then result in a misunderstanding between either the professional or the deaf person, and therefore lead to some liability issues down the road.
Interpreters in healthcare, interpreters have specialized training, specifically some in legal skills, other now thanks to the Commission on the Deaf and Hard of Hearing, they have specific training in healthcare practices. And what that does is we provide interpreting services from birth all the way to end of life. And we work in a variety of settings, whether it's doctor's offices, clinics, hospitals, mental health situations, emergency rooms, substance abuse, mental health. There's a whole array of services where interpreters work.
And now, especially with COVID and telehealth, interpreters are also working virtually, which is more of a challenge. Most deaf people would prefer to have an interpreter face-to-face than by telehealth. But that is one of the areas that, fortunately or unfortunately, we are now faced with. We certainly work often, and RIRID works in an advocacy role to help ensure that communication needs are met for the deaf people, and that also would include, from an interpreter's perspective, advocating for the use of a deaf interpreter as needed. So we're trying to make sure that communication is understood, that informed consent is understood, and that the communication is clear and accurate. So one of the issues that comes up in healthcare is knowing, one of the concerns interpreters often have is knowing who the point person is, whether that's in a medical facility or whether that's in a doctor's office. And having a point person is really critical for us in our role, because we know who to be able to contact, not just for the billing piece of it, but also confirmation of appointments. And if an appointment needs to be canceled or rescheduled, we have one person to be able to contact. And we know that that communication is a direct source, rather than trying to find out who to talk to, or relying on an email that might happen or might not happen, or going to an office and suddenly finding out that the appointment was canceled or rescheduled and we were not aware of that.
And one of the things RIRID offers is training to how to use an interpreter. And we would do that in combination with the Rhode Island Association for the Deaf. We've done that in the past with deaf interpreters along with hearing interpreters. We've provided training on how to appropriately request an interpreter, and also how to use an interpreter and what the interpreter role is during the appointment, whether it's healthcare or otherwise.
And sometimes I know when healthcare provide as a speech and language pathologist, in addition, I know that medical model, sometimes we don't get that training in how to use an interpreter. So often you'll see healthcare providers talking to the interpreter, where really the interpreter is there just for that communication between the healthcare provider and the deaf consumer. So we're not involved in that. We are involved really specifically in that, making sure the communication is clear and direct.
And one of the other things that we do as a resource in the state is we're trying to expand the quality of interpreters and the amount of interpreters, and encourage others to come to the state of Rhode Island to interpret, or even right within Rhode Island, grow the number of interpreters as a viable option for a career.
And RIRID is always willing to come to a healthcare facility or any office. We've done presentations before to the medical community, again, about how to use an interpreter. We work in conjunction with the Association of the Deaf in doing that, so that you are confident about how to obtain an interpreter, what the interpreter role is, what the responsibility of both or all parties are in that. And that helps clarify. And again, I go back to that piece of informed consent. And that's such a difficult issue. And if you're dealing with a person who uses ASL, you want to make sure that you have accurate communication so that you are actually getting informed consent before going ahead with any procedures.
This is our contact information. You can visit our website, ririd.org, and our mailing address. You can reach out to us via email at our president email, riridpresident@ririd.org. And if any other resources you are in need of with specifically interpreting, we're available for you. Thank you for your time and attention.